All right, it looks like we have a decent amount of people on the call. So we'll go ahead and get started. I first want to introduce myself. My name is Katie Unthank. I'm the Director of Communications at PAI, and I'm really glad that you're all here. I love talking about communications, so hopefully you'll be as excited about this as I am. So just to get started, Vincent, can you kindly go to the next screen? So again, welcome. Today we're going to spend about an hour, hour and a half going over the process for building a communication strategy. So this is our plan for the day. Of course, welcome. We're going to start out with the purpose of a communication strategy, understanding why you need one and how you should build one. Then we'll launch into the tools to prepare for the process. So before you start building the strategy, there's a lot of things you want to do ahead of time to make sure that your strategy is serving your needs. After that, we'll look at audience segmentation, how to figure out who your audiences are and how to divvy them up so you know exactly how to reach them with targeted messages. And within that section, we're going to spend some time really speaking about donors specifically, since we all know they're incredibly important to our work and making sure that we keep our work going. After that, we're going to look at the components of a strategy and the GOST framework, which I find extremely helpful. After that, we'll look at creating content and then disseminating that content. And again, we're going to dive into social media specifically because I believe a lot of us are interested in that. And it's very helpful to know the do's and the don'ts, things you should avoid doing, and things that will help you increase your engagement. And then finally, measuring success. With any strategy that you're executing, you want to know if what you're doing is actually working so that you can then tweak or change your plans accordingly. And then finally, at the end, we're going to go and leave some time for questions and answers. And, anything that comes up during the presentation, go ahead and write it down so that at the end, you don't forget, and I am able to help you as much as I can. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. So the purpose, why do we even need a communication strategy? A lot of times organizations create an organizational strategy or a vision or a mission, but don't have the time or the capacity to build a communication strategy specifically. And as a communications person, I think it's really important that you have one because it's great, the work that we're doing. It's all very important work, but it's hard to continue that work if people don't know what you're doing, why they should care, and then why they should fund that. So before embarking on the process of creating your comm strategy, it's crucial to grasp what exactly a comm strategy is, the fundamental why behind your creating it, and then the intended outcomes it's designed to deliver. Next slide, please. So my favorite way of explaining a communication strategy is basically, it is a tool that ensures the right messages reach the right people at the right time, which enhances the effectiveness of your team's communications efforts overall. So you're not spending time doing things that aren't working. The strategy provides a really thorough overview of the objectives and the motivations behind your team's efforts. It also makes sure that your work aligns with the organization's larger mission, vision, strategic goals, and it's an essential mechanism for ensuring that your team's efforts are in line with what the organization is trying to achieve. the actual document that you create is a really, really helpful resource because you can give it to your colleagues in other departments or members of the communications team, and it gives them a very clear understanding of what your strategy is and then what their role within the strategy will be. And another thing that I really love is, when you sit down with your team, I know we do this, we sit down and we'll brainstorm a ton of ideas of things that we want to do that year, because really communications is so creative. It can include anything under the sun. But a strategy, it brings structure, focus, consistency. It enables you to use your time and your funds more effectively, while also prioritizing the goals of your organization. It helps you figure out what are the most effective methods for achieving your goals. And one thing that I find really helpful is, for me, running this department, a lot of members from our program or our policy team come and they give me ideas for communications activities. With the strategy in front of me, I'm able to very quickly determine whether that activity is going to achieve our organizational goals or not. And so it's a very easy way to say yes or no to ideas, because you can't do everything. You have to be very strategic about the things that you decide to do. And so this is a great layout to do that. Next slide, please. So with anything worth doing, it's really important to do a little bit of research before you start. If you want to craft really impactful messages and make sure that you're selecting the most effective tactics to reach your audiences or to build a really great campaign, you really need to get a comprehensive assessment of the issue that you work on, and an understanding of how it's being perceived by target audiences. Next slide. So if we do research before, we can ensure that we're identifying the right audiences, capturing their views and their opinions. So as an example, before we launched our communication strategy at PI, we administered a survey among our staff to find out who they thought our target audiences are. Who do they think are the most important people we should be reaching to reach our goals? Also, which projects do you think aren't receiving enough love, aren't getting enough attention, and deserve it, and need to be relayed to certain audiences? And the thing is, even when you have very limited resources, there are still some really helpful things that you can do to gather information, to improve your messaging, and build a strategy. One example, which I personally do every single morning, is to stay ahead of the curve by monitoring the news in the media daily. A great, easy, free way to do this is to set up Google Alerts. So I have Google Alerts set up for the different laws that we follow here in the US, certain issues overseas that we focus on. And that way, as soon as something is mentioned in the media, I know immediately. For instance, we had an article published by someone in a major outlet, and it quoted one of our staff members. I had a Google alert set up for his name, so I knew the moment it was published instead of finding out like a month later. And so I was able to tweet about it immediately. So staying ahead and really staying on top of the media, both local to international, for any kind of updates, helps you be aware of current events that are happening related to your work, audiences that will probably be interested in any kind of trends that are happening. This helps you develop a campaign. It's also a great way to conduct qualitative research. So you can see what people are saying about the topic and how it's being told via stories. You can also take a moment to look at the reader's views or comments at the bottom of an article, to see how people are reacting. Same with social media, looking at comments on Facebook or Twitter. Another great way, as I just mentioned, is tracking social media interactions, which is a great method of qualitative research. So for instance, if there's a Twitter account that is for a very specific local neighborhood and you want to know what they think about a certain subject, you can join that or follow that Twitter account and see what residents have to say within that particular community. Another great thing to do is to coordinate just an informal focus group. This is another way of obtaining qualitative research, depending on the specific issue or the desired outcome. This could involve pulling together a group of staff from different departments, like I mentioned earlier, or just having a casual conversation about a particular issue, or assembling a team of community stakeholders to get their input on a proposed policy that you're working on. So having these discussions with stakeholders is just a great way to get some really valuable insight with very little effort. And then finally, conducting an informal digital survey. There's a lot of online methods available. We personally use SurveyMonkey. If I remember correctly, there is a free option available, but then you can also get enhanced features if you pay a little bit more. So that's a great way. I believe Gizmo is a great one. So you can, take advantage of these tools. Facebook, I think, has also implemented a basic survey option that you could take advantage of. You just want to make sure that when you're doing this kind of work, you want to get enough responses to get an accurate sample size so that your results aren't skewed. Next slide, please. The great thing about research is that it also allows us to get a broad view of the landscape or the environment in which we're operating, which brings me to conducting a SWOT analysis or an SWOT analysis. This is probably one of my favorite tools and one of the most critical tools to use when creating a strategy. And this could be used for communications strategies. A lot of businesses use this strategy before they create their business plan. And this quote, I think, is great. So an analysis or a SWOT analysis, it's not just an intellectual exercise you do for fun. It is going to be the foundation of your strategic planning. Next slide, please. So as I said, it's an essential resource because it allows for a better understanding of your organization's current position and the potential for progress and growth. Having a clear understanding of where your organization sits enables you to pinpoint the most advantageous strategies to take advantage of. And so we're going to talk really quickly about the purpose of this analysis, the internal and external factors, and then how you go ahead and implement it or use it to create your strategy. So very basically, it's an evaluation of your organization's communication strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it allows an organization to get a really comprehensive understanding of its internal environment and the external environment. So as you see in the chart, the internal items are the ones along the top. So that would be our strengths and our weaknesses. What is our organization doing well? And what are things that we can improve? And then along the bottom are things that are external to the organization. So that would be opportunities that we could take advantage of or threats that could harm us and we have to be aware of. So what we do and often is we get together all of the stakeholders within our organization that are going to feed into the strategy. We sit down in a room. For us, we have flip charts paced all along the walls, and we go one by one. And for strengths, we throw out every kind of strength that we can think of for our organization, and we write them down. And we do that for each of the 4 categories. The outcome is going to give us valuable insight for our strategy, for decision-making, how to distribute our resources, and ultimately how to elevate our performance and making sure that we're competitive. It's also something that can be done on a regular basis to make sure that you guys stay flexible, creative, and adaptable to things that are always changing in the landscape. So as I said, a comprehensive internal review looks at the fundamental strengths and weaknesses of your organization. And these are shaped by internal factors that are under your organization's control and not driven by external influences. Examining your abilities and limitations in satisfying the expectations of your audiences and stakeholders is the main objective. It's also going to help you explore the internal elements that contribute to an organization's strengths and weaknesses in meeting the demands of your audiences, as I said. So to really understand your organization's strengths, you have to look at them from an audience-focused angle. As this is the best way to find out if you are truly supporting and fulfilling your audience's needs. With the external factors, this is equally important to the internal. It involves looking at external influences or forces that impact your organization's operations. So this would be, again, opportunities to take advantage of or threats to your organization. Both exist outside of your organization and are not entirely under your control. However, they significantly influences your ability to position yourself within the broader landscape and to make really crucial considerations as you're building your plan. Next slide, please. So just to go into them a little bit further to really help you when you do this process. So your strengths. These are the things that you do really well, the resources that you have that you can draw on. These are the things that set you apart from other organizations or other groups. You should ask yourself, again, what do you do well? What do you think your strengths are? What do others see as your strengths? In the chart to the right, here's an example of a SWOT analysis that an NGO might complete. So for them, it's they have a stable source of finances. They have a great relationship with the government, and they have a really strong mission and vision. For weaknesses, these are the things that could be improved within your organization. So you can consider where do you have fewer resources than others? Again, what are others going to see as weaknesses? What can you improve? So going back to our analysis, maybe there's weakness at a certain level of the organization. Maybe you have gaps between your teams, or you're just constantly understaffed. And then going on again to our external factors, opportunities are the benefits that are available to your organization. Are there trends you can take advantage of? How can you turn your strengths into opportunities? With our example, let's think. You can have an opportunity to get buy-in from your community. Maybe there's external policies being enacted by the government that are supportive and helpful to your mission. And then finally, with threats. These are the external items that, again, could hurt your success or your progress. When considering what threats could harm you, consider what threats your weaknesses would expose you to. So this would be the community might not be as interested in the work that you're doing, or there's opposition forces that could impede your work, or restrictions from the government that could prevent you from furthering your work. And so when you create your own SWOT analysis, these are the kinds of things that you really want to think deeply about and just get them all out and just lay them all on the table. Next slide, please. So implementing your SWOT analysis, how do you go about creating the strategies for your communication strategy based on the SWOT analysis? So after you've completed the SWOT analysis, you rank the findings by importance, and then you can utilize them to create both short-term and long-term comms plans. You're striving to essentially increase positive outcomes and decrease negative consequences. So the first thing is you want to identify strategic implications by considering how your company or your organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats overlap with each other. So you take a minute to review the strengths you have pinpointed and brainstorm ways to use them in order to make the most of the opportunities that are available to you. And then how can you use those same strengths to mitigate the threats that you've also identified? You also utilize the opportunities you've pinpointed to create tactics that will mitigate any weaknesses or avoid any potential threats. So this chart I have here, we have the results of our SWOT analysis along the outside perimeter. So we have the strengths and the weaknesses along the top. We have our opportunities and threats along the side. And then what you're going to do is look to see with the purple squares in the middle, what are the ways your strengths could capitalize on opportunities? What are the ways you could capitalize on opportunities by overcoming your weaknesses? What are the ways your strengths can help you mitigate threats? And then how do you minimize weaknesses and threats at the same time? Afterwards, you're going to rank these strategies that you've developed based on their importance, their potential impact, and the feasibility. Is it possible? You want to take into account the resources at your disposal, the timelines, and the potential risks. And don't forget to schedule regular review meetings once you've incorporated these strategies into your plan. And you can use these meetings moving forward to see if there's any discrepancies between the strategies you've created and the actual outcomes that you're achieving. Next slide, please. So here is an example. This is an analysis that was conducted for the platform TikTok. And so before we talked about the SWOT analysis, a TOWS analysis or TOWS analysis is when you actually take the SWOT analysis and, as I said, turn them into strategies like we just did in the other slide. So utilizing this approach can provide your organization with a clear understanding of how to take those findings and come up with useful strategies. So as we see here with TikTok, one strength that they've identified is they have a massive user base. And in the chart to the right, we see that they've looked at their strengths, looked at their opportunities, and they could introduce new features to retain the users that they have and still grow. On the left-hand side, we have a weakness. They have concerns over user data privacy. And so in the right-hand chart, they could implement stricter content guidelines and monitor. So this is just like a great example to look at. I believe you've all received a copy of the slides, so feel free to dive into it. Next slide, please. So I thought this would be a great time for us to do a little practice and have a little exercise. So we're going to take, I'm going to say maybe 5 to 10 minutes. And so what I would like you to do is to quickly conduct a quick SWOT and TOWS analysis. It doesn't have to be complete. Maybe you pick strengths and opportunities or weaknesses and opportunities. But think about your organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then see if there are any strategies you come up with to answer any of the questions within the purple boxes. And then after we're done, I would love folks to share any strategies you've come up with based on your very quick analysis of your organization. So I'll stop talking and give you all a chance to do some thinking, and then we'll come back, let's say at 8:35. All right. All right. I hope everyone had enough time and that you found it helpful. As Vincent said in the chat, feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, or use the chat if anyone would like to share what they came up with, and we can chat about it as a group. Perhaps as we wait, I can share one for PAI that just happened recently. So one of our strengths is we have a member of our staff. His name is Craig, and he happens to be an absolute expert on the budget and appropriations process for Congress. Not many people know him in the general media. But recently I saw that a major publication had a new reporter, and her entire focus was going to be congressional budgets and appropriations on reproductive health. So I reached out to her and was able to get in touch. We had a great chat, and I let her know with any future articles she was writing to reach out to us and to speak with Craig, because he could help clear up any confusion she had, any questions she might have, and she would be welcome to quote him within any articles. She was really appreciative. We've continued our conversations, and I'm hoping that it will result in a mention of us in the news. And so I always keep my eyes peeled for any journalists that are covering beats that are relevant to us, to see if I can offer someone on staff as a spokesperson or an expert or just a resource to them, because you never know how it's going to pay off down the line. So I see in the chat, we have from Darlton some strengths. Let's see here. So office space at the national level, that's definitely a strength. That increases the reach of your organization. It allows you to reach national level stakeholders, as well as those at the community level. Membership from across the country, going back to that, getting a great sample size for doing research, that would definitely be a strength and an opportunity that you could take advantage of. Evidence-based advocacy, gosh, that's such a great strength. With any kind of advocacy, having the numbers to support and the data to support your arguments is always the most effective way to reach your goals. I see we got a raised hand. Adrisa, feel free to unmute yourself.
Good morning. Okay, we are listening to you. I want to say that my organization touches the domain of nutrition. Now, concerning the SWOT analysis in our organization, last year we tried to do an analysis of the communication activities in favor of nutrition, and our hindrances is an aspect linked or tied with the environment. Because if the environment, I can give an example on the security level, if we have weaknesses at the security level, how can we see in which way to draw other alternatives to solve this issue, this problem, which is a weakness? Because it is, I think it should be a threat Now, concerning the opportunities, we also have a favorable environment uh, due to the context of the fact that all the organizations of the structure gather together to exchange and see in which way the aspect of advocacy can play their role at the level of the policies and the government. Now, in terms of strength, concerning this analysis, strength, oh, I'm asking, strength, is it what we have as asset, the means that we have, like financial means or technical means in the organization that could constitute strength? That's the question I'm asking. I want to know if assets, strength are our assets or financial assets.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna make sure you can. To answer your question, yes, financial assets are definitely a strength, as are technical experience or technical expertise. Both are internal to your organization. So you would list them both as strengths. I also like that you raised the opportunity of having really great exchange among organizations, and the way that this could impact policy. Thinking about that and thinking about the strengths that you have, I could see with having financial assets and also having great expertise, using that to create a community of practice, to bring together, to increase that exchange. So to make sure that you're stewarding the greatest thoughts, the greatest advice, the greatest suggestions when you do go and approach the government to impact policy. So thank you so much for that example. Going back to the chat, weaknesses, a high dependency on external funds and inadequate and unpredictability of funds for activities planned. I know that weakness. I think we all know that weakness. That's something PAI is also trying to figure out every day. And actually, this is great because we're about to dive into donor communications. So we have an opportunity to learn more about it in just a moment. And then hopefully we will receive funds more predictably if we're able to improve our engagement with donors. Just for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and go back. Thanks everyone for contributing. Again, if you have other examples or want to share, we can address them at the end. All right. Vincent, I think we're ready for the next slide. So this brings us to audience segmentation. So in order to have a successful strategy, you need to clearly define who your audience is or your audiences are so that you know exactly what content to create and then exactly what channel to use in order to reach them. Next slide, please. So by segmenting your audiences, you can make sense of the chaos and make progress in getting valuable insight into the behaviors of your audiences. So they are going to be categorized into groups based on their shared characteristics. With these groups, you can then create targeted campaigns, personalized messaging that truly connects with each audience. So at PAI, we wrote down every audience that we could think of. So this would be individual donors, foundations, the media, our partners, bilateral organizations. And then what we did was we segmented them based on shared characteristics. This not only improves your focus, but it also enables you to refine your messaging so that you're reaching each of those audiences very specifically. It also gives you a better understanding of what their wants and their needs are, ensuring that your efforts are more successful. So as I said, the first step is to identify who your audiences are and then why they matter to your communications goals. You could segment them by demographics, their behaviors, their interests, their needs, their challenges, the attitudes they have, or the influence that they have. You could also categorize them by level of importance. So your primary audiences, the secondary, and then tertiary, based on how important they are to achieving your goals. It also helps you focus and prioritize your resources, knowing which audiences are more important. So as an example, if your audience is women of reproductive age, you could segment them by geographic differences, so urban versus rural, or behavioral, whether or not they're currently using a method of family planning, or differences like their religion or their marital status. Once you've broken it up, you're then able to determine which segment it is that you want to target. Next slide, please. So going back to how do you communicate with donors to be really effective and ensure that you have consistent funding? As you know, nonprofit organizations, this is extremely important, both to sustain established current donors and to look out for potential donors that aren't currently supporting your organization. So you could use all different channels to connect with donors, whether it's social media or email. And it's really important, obviously, to thank them for their support and to communicate why their funds are so important and what they're being put to use for. So first, know your audience. Like we said before, it's great to do your research. That way, you're not asking questions of them that are easily obtained just by looking on the internet. So things like looking at the foundation's website, articles that have been published by the donor, or their 990 forms. Before you craft any messages, you need to know who you're talking to. What are their interests, their preferences? How do they like to receive their information? How can they provide feedback? How often do they want to hear from you? You can use donor databases, surveys, interviews to learn as much as you can about your donors and then segment them accordingly. You also want to be clear and concise. You want to make sure you can speak about your organization's mission, goals, and projects very clearly and concisely. One way to do this is to practice your 30-second elevator speech. This is essentially, if you were stuck in an elevator for 30 seconds with a donor, would you be able to convey within those 30 seconds what your organization does, why it's important, and why they should support your work? They're very busy people generally, and they don't have time to read long, complicated sentences. So it's great to be clear and concise. You want to use simple and direct language, catchy headlines, bullet points to break up text so it's easier to read, and great visuals. You want to focus on the main points, avoid jargon or acronyms that they might not be aware of. And then really importantly, you want to use a consistent and recognizable voice and tone that reflects your brand and message. So for instance, PAI, I would say that our voice and our tone is professional, but still accessible. So for instance, I would not go on our Twitter and post something that was joking and using a bunch of emojis. I would try to craft something a little more serious, but something that everyone could understand. So what you do is identify what that brand voice and tone is, and you want to use it consistently. That way, they feel that you are trustworthy. When you use different voices and tones, it makes the organization feel kind of chaotic and not having a direction, and that might make them hesitant to support your work. You also want to make sure that you're authentic and transparent. Again, this lets donors know that you're trustworthy, incredible, and that you're using their contributions wisely and effective. So you want to show your passion, your gratitude, and your impact by telling stories that really illustrate your work, but using data, testimonial, images. It's also important to be honest, to acknowledge your challenges and your failures, but also showing how you're learning and improving based on these findings. No one's perfect all the time. So it's great to highlight any challenges that you face, but how you've been adaptable and resilient and able to learn, and perhaps even do better work because of it. They also want to know that you're measuring and reporting your progress. So you want to share that with the donors and then invite their feedback. You want to be timely and relevant. You don't want to reach out to donors once a year when it's time to ask for money. You want to be having regular interactions with them and having regular stewardship throughout the year. They want to feel valued, appreciated. So you want to promptly and sincerely thank them after they've donated, show how their gift has made a difference. And you should regularly update them on your achievements so they can celebrate with you because they are a part of your organization. And you really want to work to communicate, as I said, throughout the year. Finally, be strategic and creative. Donors really want to feel inspired and challenged. And you want to make sure that you're offering them something unique and valuable. So be strategic and creative in what you're communicating and use it as a tool to cultivate and retain your donors and to increase their engagement and loyalty. Next slide, please. So we're finally at the communication strategy. What are the components of a strategy? Setting goals and objectives is an essential part of achieving success. However, the terms goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics are often used interchangeably, leading to confusion and hindering progress toward your goals. So to bring clarity to this method, the GOST method or the GHOST method is something that we use, and it provides a really practical framework to effectively define and pursue your goals. It lets you know the difference between goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics. And so we're going to delve into this method to see how it can be utilized to streamline your goal setting and, essentially achieve your desired outcomes. It's also a simple yet effective approach to goal setting and planning, as it breaks down the process into 4 key components. And these elements work together to provide a clear direction and path towards achieving success. And that way you can increase your chances of reaching your desired outcomes. Next slide, please. So the GOST framework. At the top, we have the goal. Your goal should be adapted from your organizational strategy. So the organization's purpose or vision, and it articulates the long-term, broad, high-level things that you're trying to achieve. What is your dream? And then, how would you want your communications and engagement to achieve this dream? Below that is the objective. What needs to be done to achieve this goal? So these are the short-term steps that can be evaluated and serve as the proof that you're executing your strategy effectively. So a good objective should be specific, measurable, and include a time frame. A strategy are the methods and capabilities to achieve the objective. So a strategy would be the long-term approach your organization will take to achieve the objectives, which are used to achieve the goal. And then finally, tactics. These are the specific activities to implement the strategy. These are the tangible actions that you'll take. They're very straightforward and individualized tasks that are assigned to a person or a group. So if as an example, if your strategy is saving money to buy a home, your tactics would be specific tasks like creating a budget, preparing meals at home instead of eating out to save money. Next slide, please. Another great example, if your dream or your overall goal is to become healthier, an objective, so something specific and measurable that can be measured would be, I want to lose 40 pounds by the end of next year. The strategy or the approach that you would take would be exercising more and eating better. And then the tactics, the specific actions you're going to take would include running every morning, eating a salad once a day. Another example that relates to your work, if the overall goal is to improve awareness of your organization, and one of the objectives is to increase recognition of your work by 20% among youth. Some strategies could include developing an online presence that effectively communicates with this group, or learning where young people are most active online. And then tactics could be assigning an individual employee to research one of these platforms, or creating graphics for Instagram that you know are going to appeal to youth. As you craft these, you can use this graphic to remember what makes a good goal, objective, and strategy and tactic based on the level of specificity, as well as whether something is an approach or outcome. So goals and objectives are the what. What are you doing? The strategy and the tactics are the how. Your goal and strategy are going to be very general, high-level details that give you a general direction, whereas your objectives and your tactics are specific. Next slide, please. So now we're creating content and we're getting ready to disseminate it. Something that I think is really helpful is having a content plan or a content strategy as a part of your larger comms strategy. And this is all about your outputs. What kind of content will you create to achieve your objectives, and where will you place or put that content? It involves planning, creation, publication, and management of your content and the resulting outputs or products that you create, whether it be a blog, a social media post, or a journal article. And a great content strategy will attract and engage a target audience, meeting their needs while driving higher goals. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of things that a successful content strategy allows you to do to reach your audiences. One, you want to define your goals. So you want to have a strategy that obviously moves you closer to your goals by defining what are going to be your successes of measure. You could think about what you want to accomplish with this content. And this is the time to focus specifically on the what. What are we going to create? You also want to, again, research your target audiences like you did previously, and then keep these in mind as you develop your content. One thing that's really helpful is creating an audience persona or a fictional character that represents your audience to help you guide yourself as you create content. And it makes it easier to reflect on their needs and how your content can meet those needs. As an example, we interact with members of Congress regularly. Congress members are often very busy. They have very little time, but they need to know about issues that are relevant to their constituents. And so what we do is we will create a fact sheet that is only 1 to 2 pages. That way it could be quickly handed to a member of Congress in between meetings or after you've had a chance to speak with them. And it really gives a broad overview into the issues that matter to them or the work that you're doing. That way you can quickly educate them and they have a better understanding of the work that you do. You also can perform a content audit. It's good to review your content before you plan to produce anything new. Think about what you've already released. Has it worked? Has it helped you achieve your objectives? If it has, maybe you can recycle that content. If you had, a blog that was really, really great at reaching your audiences, you could take that blog and use it to create tweets or Facebook posts. And then you could also think about things that haven't worked well and then know that you want to steer away from those. So evaluating your present content will help you acquire insights into the kind of information your target audience may find appealing or something that they wouldn't find helpful. You also want to select the kind of content that you can reasonably create. So consider the kinds of materials that would be most well received by your audience and help you achieve your goals. So this would be creating something like a blog post. Would videos be helpful? Maybe it's an email newsletter. So in order to effectively optimize the content that you choose, it's important to carefully consider the steps that need to be taken. So if you're going to create content that is social media, messaging, you want to think about the hashtags that your audiences use to optimize that content and make sure that they see it. So you want to be very strategic when thinking about how to really elevate that content after it's been created. When you build your content plan, you want to deliberate on your efforts and pinpoint the topics you want to address across the different types of content. So think about the subjects that intersect with your individual or organizational strengths and the topics that really matter to your desired audiences. And then think of ways to continue these discussions so that it's a continuing conversation. You can also take advantage of multiple platforms to distribute the content. You also want to establish a plan for your content generation so you can clearly identify the actions needed to kickstart the process. Think about the individuals who are going to be a part of that team to create the content and how they'll help you achieve your objectives. Keep in mind the kind of tools that you'll need in order to create content. So again, that it's realistic and feasible. So this could be, is there editing software that you're going to need? You want to measure the impact of anything that you create. So as soon as it goes live on your website or audiences start interacting with it, you want to have a plan to evaluate its performance. Next slide, please. So the dissemination plan is figuring out what channels you're going to use to disperse the content that you've created to a broad range of people. So examples of different channels, that would be mass media, social media, public speaking, written materials. Information dissemination promptly delivers relevant and precise information to the intended audiences. Before anything else, think about the recipients of your message and the number of people you're reaching out to. Evaluate their comprehension, interest, and remember the reason or purpose of your communication with them and the tone you want to use. You also want to consider the time sensitivity of the message and whether you need to get it out urgently or it can be seen at a later time. So once you've analyzed your audiences, you can select the most suitable channel based on their needs, their preferences, and their expectations. You want to make sure that the channel resonates with your audience by matching it to their preference and behaviors. So when targeting youth or groups that are predominantly using technology to communicate, you want to utilize digital platforms like social media to get maximum impact. Utilizing avenues such as emails or webinars could help reach a more professional audience. In certain situations, using more than one communication channel may be necessary for effective audience outreach. An example would be sending an email to confirm a meeting, conducting it through a video call, or summarizing it with a report. Next slide, please. So social media. When you're going to share information on social media, there are some things you should do and others that you should try to avoid. So include a call to action. When you post a message, there is something that you should be trying to achieve, a purpose. And the call to action is what you're asking the viewer or the reader to do. So you need to move them from one step to another with your message. So depending on your goal, you could your call to action would be signing up for a newsletter. So you would want that message to include, how they do it and why they should do it. If you're asking for donations, you should explain why your organization matters and how they can contribute. Every message should have a purpose. So ask yourself, will my audience care about this message? You want to reach or use the right tools to optimize your posts. So to improve your social media presence, you have to post at the right time. So for Facebook, that's 3 to 7 times a week. On Twitter, it would maybe be 2 to 3 times daily. The problem is organizations are often too busy to keep up with a regular schedule. So there are tools like Buffer or Hootsuite that you could use to automate those messages. And you can take advantage of built-in social media business tools on various platforms as well. You also want to promote your social media accounts. So when someone goes to your website, they should be able to see icons or a way to quickly find you on social media. So some examples would be, like I said, adding the icons to your website, adding social media feeds to your website sidebar, promoting your social media accounts in your e-newsletter. You also want to pay attention to what's trending. One of the best ways to create a bigger social media presence is to stay on track of social media trends and catch them at the right time. So you can ride a popular trend to get your profile in front of new viewers, and it can even help your posts go viral. So keep an eye on what's popular. On Twitter, you can see trending topics on the homepage. Look at what hashtags are being used so you can get more views. You also want to focus on eye-catching visuals so that you get noticed in a very crowded social media space. And it'll help your messages to stand out. So focus on attention-grabbing visuals. This could be videos, GIFs, memes. Avoid using too many stock photos. It's always best to get photos of the actual work you're doing because they're far more interesting than using something that anyone could find on the internet. Behind the scenes photos are great, so so audiences feel like they're getting a sneak peek or a behind the scenes look. You also want to actively engage with your audience. So if users are interacting with your messages, you want to respond. If they ask a question, you want to respond. You want to make sure that you are liking and replying to the comments they leave on your posts. You could also increase engagement by holding contests. You could follow back interesting followers and members of your target audience. Each social media platform caters to a different audience, so you tailor your social media posts to that platform. So things to avoid. Stop pushing out quantity over quality. The idea that the more we post, the more audiences we see is often untrue. You want people to actually engage with your post, not just see it and move on. You also want to stop posting without a strategy. So you want to remember 3 key rules. Be active, be consistent, and be engaged at all times, and not just when we make the time. When we fail to communicate regularly on social media, our content and our brand will appear less on users' news feeds. And then stop remaining silent. Like I said, audiences don't like to be ignored, and they get frustrated when they reach out on social media and don't get a comment to something that they've posted. So be sure to consistently check your social media accounts and respond and engage with your followers. Next slide, please. So we've done so much work, but we want to make sure that what we're doing is working so we can make changes to our strategy. So after you finalize your communication strategy, often what you'll do is create a communications plan. So this is the detailed blueprint that allows you to execute the larger strategy you've created. The details of a communication plan are often specific so that everyone on your team has a deeper understanding of what they have to do. So it has the steps, the resources, the timelines, and it can also, you can also use this information to make decisions and create communication campaigns. Next slide, please. KPIs or key performance indicators are extremely helpful. These are the numerical benchmarks that we use to assess progress towards a specific objective over time. They give teams specific targets to work towards, to track progress and get valuable insights into to support decision-making across the organization. So going back to our previous example about getting healthier, we're going to lose 40 pounds by exercising more. The tactic is going to be jogging, and we're going to do it daily. So how do we know it's working? Our key performance indicators would be the number of pounds we lost. We can measure that. What was the length of each run? How many salads did we eat that week? So this is ways to measure what we're doing to see if it's actually working. Next slide, please. In this example of a communications plan, the strategy is to increase how much our audiences are engaging with our digital content, like our website or our e-newsletter. So the KPIs are the way we'll measure whether the new pages on our website are being viewed, how much, and by whom. The newsletter KPIs are quantitative measures of how email recipients interact and respond to the content. So for the website, it would be unique visitors or traffic to the web page. With the newsletter, it could be the email open rate, the response rate, or the number of people that unsubscribed. So based on your KPIs, you might alter your communication strategy and reconsider certain tactics and activities. So maybe you're not getting much success with the website. So we're going to put more effort into our newsletter because we're getting great results there. And this makes sure that if you aren't achieving your intended results, you're able to pivot and make sure that you're being very strategic in what you're doing. Next slide. So that brings us to the end. I hope everyone found that really helpful. So now we're going to open it up for questions, and I will try my best to answer them. So again, feel free to drop them in the chat. You can unmute yourself, and I will, as I said, try my best to be helpful. Oh, so I see a question from Valerie. How to minimize the risks of social account hacking? That's a great question. I know for us, we have set up two-factor authentication on all of our accounts, whether it's social media or our email. And this allows us to make sure that only members of our team are able to get into our accounts. So this is where you sign in with your username and your password. And then the next step is where they will send a code to your email or your cell phone to make sure it's actually you trying to log in. And it's actually really funny or crazy that you're asking this question, because I recently woke up one morning and saw that I had received multiple messages from my social media accounts giving me a code, meaning that someone had been trying to hack my account all night. But because I had two-factor authentication set up, they weren't able to get into my account. Once I realized that had happened, I immediately went in and changed my passwords. I think it's also smart to update your passwords regularly. For PAI, we have a Google Doc that is password protected. So every time I update a password, I update it in the Google Doc so I can regularly change our passwords, and the whole team knows what they can use the next time they need to log in.
So thank you very much, Kathy. This is Dalton from Sierra Leone Health Alert. I'm very excited listening, and as you went through looking at a SWOT analysis of the organization, and sometimes we tend to want to see how do we connect, because most times when we are developing a strategic document or a strategic plan for organization, that is most times when we talk around the SWOT analysis. But then when it comes to talk around communication, most times we tend to forget about those framework, and it's so critical. However, you touched on one particular topic that along the slide that I had wanted you to maybe go back on and maybe try to make me understand and maybe add some clarity to it. It's a page on what, where you talked around the general and specifics, and you're looking at goals and objectives and strategy and tactics. I wanted to get a better sense of actually what actually that will help to convey as we continue to build communication strategy in our various organizations. And definitely for us as an advocacy organization, communication is very key and very critical to us. And within the organization, we have a very strong youth network, which uses social media a lot. They leverage on the use of social media because they find, as you're talking around audience segmentation, their audience are more glued and more found within the social media network spaces. And so that is how they're able to cascade or maybe amplify their voices and spread information. So I would like to maybe get a little bit more sense of that particular slide.
Thank you so much for that question. I'll wait for Vincent to get to that slide. It would be number 18, if that's helpful, Vincent. So
yes, that's
perfect. Thank you. So one thing that you just touched on is, you have an organizational strategy, but then sometimes an organization doesn't have a communication strategy or doesn't have the time to create one. So I think it's really important to try to get communications champions within leadership levels, or to convey to leadership why a communication strategy is so important. And one of the ways that I like to phrase it is, we spend so much time and energy doing really important work. And that's great because we're helping communities. But if we don't share what we're doing, we're not going to be able to continue helping those communities. So it's very important for us to get in touch with the people who care about our work and prove to them why we matter and why we need to keep doing what we're doing. And that requires communications. Going back to this chart, I'm glad that we're back at it because it really is very helpful. I know for me personally, I get very confused. What's an objective? What's a strategy? Why are we even doing this? What this is I kind of see it as like a ladder. A strategy helps make sure that the really specific items that I'm doing every single day are ultimately helping the organization. And so having it broken down by a huge goal that is aligned to our actual organization, that ensures that what we're doing is not necessarily a waste of time, but isn't really supporting the organization overall. So making sure that that first goal is tied to the organization's mission, make sure that everything else that falls underneath is done with a purpose. And then under that, when creating your objectives and strategies, as you create that, keeping the goal in mind, and make sure that by the time you get to those specific tactics and the little things that you're doing every single day, it might not feel like they're doing something for the organization, but because you've done this plan and broken it down to these levels, then you know that what you're doing is serving a purpose and ultimately contributing to goals. So, you know, on one day, 8 hours in the office, I might be writing tweets, I might be creating a blog, I'm doing so many things, and I only have so much time. And so I want to make sure that those little things that I'm doing that might not seem like something big are actually feeding into something much larger. There might not be a reason for me to tweet 8 hours a day. You know what I mean? That might not be necessary. So I don't want to waste my time doing things that are not ultimately going to serve a purpose. So, you know, with youth and social media, having a strategy, doing the research, it might be that, you know, there's an opportunity outside of social media to reach youth. It's a great way, but maybe there's something that we identify that could be just as effective, but easier to execute. And then you can work that into your strategy and make sure that the things that you're doing on a daily level or on a daily basis are actually reaching youth. So I hope that was helpful. Let me check the chat again. All right. Valerie.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for this capacity building. It's very insightful, interesting as well. Well, I'm very much elated that we are taking part in this training on communication strategy because that's one of the chinks in the armor of organizations. And that's the case even for our organization because we deliver a lot of products, but there is no adequate communication that accompanies these productions. Well, the truth is that an organization can develop a communication strategy, but for instance, as for Cameroon, the very many ethnic groups and tribes that we have makes it difficult to stick to the initial communication plan, and we have to resort to tactics, innovative tactics that were not included in the initial document in order to reach our various targets. For instance, well, I hope you get me clearly. Yes, please. For instance, there is a project that is funded by the PAI, and we are actually implementing it. We had initiative to foster community dialogue as initially planned. And so we had a strata of population that was not factored into the strategy. So all the level the poem. And it areas in very remote localities in the eastern region of our countries, and so they do not have access to quality healthcare and training services. We have a second tier of the population that was not actually targeted, but in the course of implementing our strategy, we included them in our objectives. The hard of hearing and those that have hearing impairments. And so the tools that are being developed both at the Ministry of Health or in other ministerial departments really lack strategies to reach out to these other components of the communities. Meanwhile, they also need to have access to information. It's in this slide that I think that what you're doing is actually instrumental. It's a linchpin because it leads us to understand that even if you've developed a communication strategy and you have a handout or maybe other communication tools that you use, there is always need for innovation in the sense that you're faced with situations on the ground that require you to be flexible. But also, I'd like to make a plea. At the FESAP, we really need your support for uh, the improvement on our community.
I apologize. I think I might have lost sound.
On the English channel.
Allô?
Valérie, à vous, la parole est à vous, vous veuillez continuer.
Maintenant, je disais que on avait été victime effectivement de ce piratage.
I was actually saying you talked about hacking and piracy, and I agree with the colleague that raised the question. We had been hacked, and up till date we have not been able to recover those informations. But what I did is I added another colleague as co-host and co-holder of the account, but I was surprised to be evicted, and so I do not have access to our account anymore. So the colleague who actually hijacked the platform said it was not his making. And so I had to first forgo that platform and resort to another platform. So we're facing a lot of challenges with this account hacking. For instance, I have not been able up till now to recover the Facebook account that was hacked. So this is a major challenge in our activities, and we need support from PAI to help build and develop our website, because right now it's not very active, and so we are not very fluid in our communication.
Thank you so much. I understand that struggle. We're also working really hard to figure out how to increase audiences to our website. there was a piece at the beginning that you spoke about that I did hear about pivoting and being flexible and innovative, considering the funding that we have. And one thing that I've done this year, or when I create my communication strategy, is I build a strategy, I have the tactics and the things that I want to do for the year, and I plan them out by quarter. So these are the things I'll do Q1 through 4, and the budget that I'll need to do those things. And then that way, as I'm moving through the year, if something becomes really important, I'm able to pivot and say, okay, I'm gonna not do that Q4 or that activity in the fourth quarter. And instead, I'm gonna use those funds to innovate and do this new thing that I just learned about. So planning out for the whole year and how you're going to use your funds throughout the whole year, I think is really, really helpful. And with your concerns, more than happy to work with you and the GFF team here at PAI to be as helpful as possible. So I think we're right at time. I'm sure there's plenty more questions, and I'm more than happy to help. So all of you are free to get in touch with me, and I'll do my best to be responsive and be helpful. I'm going to put my email address in the chat. And I just want to thank all of you for participating and being here today. And again, I love communications, and I hope you now love it a little more too. So thank you so much.